Chers amis, on va enchaîner. Please, can you take seat? Okay, okay. Ça va, merci beaucoup. Ok, donc on va enchaîner avec un second panel, toujours sur la question de l'eau, en lien notamment avec la problématique de la protection des écosystèmes et la question épineuse de l'orpaillage. Donc, le panel sera en anglais. Nous aurons notamment M. Gutiérrez, qui sera notre intervenant en présentiel. Et on aura une deuxième personne, Madame Anne Nakafero, qui sera en ligne. Et nous remercions Tobias d'être là et surtout de prendre la modération de cette session. Et tout de suite, you have the floor to introduce it.
So thanks a lot. Like I said, Didier mentioned we're going to be talking in English today for this last session. So we take about an hour to talk about water and ecosystems, and especially about water quality in relation to small-scale mining. Now, I don't know if you ever heard the expression as mad as a hatter. Do you know this expression? We say it in English, if somebody is completely mad, we say he's as mad as a hatter. Now, and it's in English, and it means somebody who's making hats is completely crazy. And this thing has a historical origin, because in the old days, people used to wear felt hats made of felt, and they were made through a process of softening the felt with mercury. And if people used mercury to clean these hats and to soften them for many years, they slowly, sort of mentally, they began to lose their concentration, and they became poisoned and went mad. So there's a historical reality to being as mad as a hatter, and this brings us to the issue of mercury. And there is a specific environmental convention which protects the use of mercury. It is one of the first environmental conventions internationally on mercury, and we're going to hear a lot about it in this section. And so I look forward very much to the presentations that we're going to hear. First of all, we'll be listening to a presentation from my colleague here, Richard Gutierrez, who is a project management officer at the Minamata Convention Secretariat. And he has worked for more than 2 decades on environmental policymaking related to chemicals and to waste. And he has worked since 2001 on problems related to electronic waste, and together with small-scale miners in the Philippines, Indonesia, and Mongolia, as well as other countries. So I look forward to hearing from Richard about the contents of the Minamata Convention. What is it set up to do? What does it do in practice? How do they work with country actors to diminish the impacts of small-scale mining? And perhaps to touch on some case studies from the Philippines and Indonesia, but also to say that we are talking about water as much as possible. So I'd like to remind you to try to stay as close as you can to the topic of water for the session. So, and then after that, we'll have a colleague from Uganda to continue from Uganda online on the same topic. This is Anne Nakufare. And so we'll start with Richard. So you have the floor.
All right, excellent. Good afternoon, everyone, and my apologies. I'll be speaking in English. And also thank you very much to Africa 21 for the opportunity. This is, we're very glad and appreciate the to have this face-to-face and sort of the kind of discussion after so long. So just to, so one of the things, a good place to start is mad as a hatter. As Tobias has mentioned, this, at least in English, this has been very common, most popularly in Alice in Wonderland. If you've ever watched that movie or read the book, there is that character, most recently played by Johnny Depp, who plays a Mad Hatter. So it's not just a historical truth, but it's also biologically correct. So mercury is one of the chemicals of concern that's been identified by the World Health Organization, primarily because of three really serious characteristics. It's bioaccumulative, it's toxic, and its permanence, its persistence. So if you look at your chemicals, the table of elements, mercury is there. So one of the really big challenge with mercury is its persistence. It cannot be destroyed by any chemical means. So it just changes its form. And that sort of becomes a big problem with small scale mining, which I will speak about quickly. So just tap me if I'm taking too much time. But that's where the Minamata Convention's sort of core is, because of this really toxic chemical that's persistent and it's bioaccumulative. Bioaccumulative being it sort of it starts small and it becomes more and more and affects, primarily going back to water. One of the main problems we're seeing with mercury is it's poisoning the biggest protein source we have in this planet, which is fish. So exposure to mercury is varied depending on where you are and depending on the species. But predominantly, most of the exposure of humans comes from fish, unfortunately. And as I mentioned, because of their persistence, they're not destroyed. So mercury that's burned in one place tends to migrate and concentrates on the poles. Either which way, a mercury that's burned in the Philippines can migrate further in the northern latitudes and then bioaccumulate in the ocean, contaminating the fish. And that's why there is the treaty called Minamata Convention on Mercury. So it's named after Minamata because that's where the biggest accident, where this was became well known in Minamata, Japan. I won't go into the details, but they actually came out with a movie with it as well, with also the same actor that played the Mad Hatter. And in any case, yeah. So if you're interested, if you want to watch it, go ahead and watch it. If you want to read the book, there's a lots of stories and also articles that's been written on Minamata. So our convention comes from that place, in honor of the victims, also with the firm belief that we will not and should not have another Minamata in our midst. So what does the convention do? So it manages the various life stages of mercury, from its, how would you say, from the mining of mercury. Well, first, let me just distinguish that there are, mercury is both, there's naturally occurring mercury, and then there's man-made or anthropogenic sources, which is essentially mined mercury. What the convention does is manage each life cycle stages of mercury. We're not trying to, the convention doesn't protect the mercury. It controls mercury so that its emissions and releases, its emissions to air and releases to land and water is reduced, and where feasible, eliminated altogether. So the convention is about controlling and ensuring that water, our precious resource, land and air as well, are protected. So we reduce and if possible, eliminate exposure to fish, which essentially now goes back and benefits us humans in general. Now, going straight into gold, artisanal small-scale gold mining. The Minamata Convention is one of the multilateral environmental agreements, if not the only one, if I'm not mistaken, that looks into artisanal small-scale gold mining. In fact, there's a specific provision in the convention, Article 7, on artisanal small-scale gold mining. So the term artisanal small-scale gold mining varies per country. So there's no, I would say, aside from the convention, there's no sort of catch-all. But at least from the convention perspective, the convention defines it as any individual or enterprise engaged in small-scale mining with small capital investment. So what does that mean? So it essentially differs from large-scale mining. So this is what you at least visually would see. And in terms of Africa, you have these small-scale miners. So this is not just gold panning. So this is gold panning. It could be panning in the riverside, streams, or it could be on in the mountains. So it's various forms. But one of the characteristics as well of small-scale gold mining, for the most part, is that there's a lot of mercury use in it. So globally, there are around 10 to 15 million artisanal small-scale gold miners. Annually, based on the 2020 data, emissions and releases from small-scale gold mining is around 2,000 tons of mercury per year going into the atmosphere. We're also looking at, in terms of gold production, 20% of global production is coming from artisanal small-scale gold mining, or ASGM. So to put a dollar value in that, we're looking at what, 24 to 28 billion dollars annually from small-scale gold mining. In the Philippines, artisanal small-scale gold mining outpaces large-scale gold mining in terms of gold production by far. But having said that, so you have 10 to 16 million miners, 4 to 5 million approximately women and children involved in small-scale mining as well. So I'm painting this picture from a convention perspective and from a practical perspective in terms of its impact and reach. So small-scale gold mining is a complex development issue. One of the things that was discussed when the treaty was being negotiated is how to best deal with small-scale gold mining. And one of the prevailing approaches is that, and also the fact that what we were seeing during the negotiations was that small-scale gold mining was very context, country-specific. So coming up with a blanket approach was very, very difficult. What was needed in Peru could be very, very different from Burkina Faso or the Philippines. So one way the convention approached that is that under Article 7, if a country determines that it has artisanal small-scale gold mining, which is more than insignificant, it's obligated to develop what we call a national action plan. A national action plan requires each party to hit or at least address several issues, or in its national action plan include several items, one of which is a national objective on reduction, and more related to water, strategies to reduce releases into water. So, and I note currently the convention has 32 parties from Africa. And I don't have the numbers with me offhand, but those African countries who have determined who are parties to the convention and have determined that they have small-scale gold mining that is more than insignificant, are now required to develop national action plans to include reduction, national objectives and reduction, and with specifically also addressing strategies to reduce releases of not just mercury, but effluent into water. So in terms of impact, in terms of water bodies, the most immediate actually is not mercury, but actually the effluent from the mining process. So for those of you who are familiar with the small-scale mining process, it's ore that's crushed, gold is retrieved, and you have a byproduct of a mass of dust or sand that is usually just flushed into the water systems, especially if the operation is happening or occurring near water bodies. So you do have this immediate problem of effluent levels in the water bodies that either changes the course of the water or makes it or impacts biodiversity, marine biodiversity. And then on top of that, you have this layer of danger posed by the mercury within the process, because together with the effluent is also the mercury, unfortunately. And because of that, the mercury then travels and so on and so forth. And that's why it became a global treaty, because mercury does not stay put in one location, it migrates. So no one country can address the problem of mercury use in small-scale gold mining, but rather it requires a global effort to do so. So I'll end my sort of long discussion there and pass it on to Tobias. And I'm here for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. if she's online, I'm hoping she's online, Anne Nagufero can continue speaking on behalf of the Minamata Convention, and she's the focal point for Uganda. So I'm very interested to hear what she's going to say from the point of view of how that is being taken forward in Uganda. And I believe that she's also working together with the National Environmental Management Authority of Uganda on the convention. So can you hear us, Anne? And can you...
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, well, you have the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and greetings, everyone. I would first of all start by saying or re-echoing what the previous speaker has said, that ASGM contributes over 20% of the global gold production. And down to Africa, this production supplements seasons where we have agriculture failing. Why am I bringing agriculture? That agriculture equally consumes a lot of water and also leads to eutrophication of water bodies, especially through the use of agrochemicals. So much as panning might be another consumer of water, we should be mindful that it supplements the livelihoods of people in Africa, especially when they do not meet ends or yields in agriculture. However, we are cognizant of the quantity of water that would be required, especially in gold processing that is mercury-free, especially the gravitational processes like panning. And the strategies that we have put in place, and in some areas we've seen them working, is to ensure that the ASGM sector is formalized. When we talk of formalization, we look at the formal integration of the artisanal and small-scale gold miners into the formal economy. Once they are integrated, they will equally get inputs, just like, for instance, the agriculture sector receives, or any other sectors within the Africa region. And so when they are formalized, concerns of pollution from panning will be catered for through strategies like treatment of wastewater, through restoration of especially water catchments, because most of the gold mining takes place in this area. Restoration of the water catchments would be able to support continuity of water flow, but also in ensuring that the sites where mining is taking place are reclaimed, and therefore the hydrological process is able to continue. Through formalization, that would require regulation, especially environmental regulation. It will be able to cater for instance, biodiversity offsetting, where we realize that we will lose a lot in the environment in which they are working in. Such areas can be offset elsewhere, just like it happens, for instance, for the agriculture sector, that has also encroaches a lot on biodiversity, including water. The other areas are definitely the licensing regimes that the different African countries are looking at to ensure that every miner, in whatever category they are, has a safe environment, both in terms of occupational health and safety and licensing. The story is really quite long. I wouldn't want to take up the time for the other speakers, but I can still chip in when questions are being asked. But as like the previous speaker said, we have national action plans that are directing the usage of the environment, especially water conservation, both in quality and quantity. Thank you so much. And of course, recycling. Many of these artisanal and small-scale mining sites, you will find that water is being recycled. What we are trying to phase down now and phase out is the use of mercury. For instance, in Uganda, we already have a law which came into force last year that has prohibited the use of mercury use, and we are now looking at alternatives. Much as the alternatives may need a lot of water, we are also engaging the academia to research into alternatives that may not require a lot of water, but also promote water recycling. Thank you so much. I will come back to speak once there are any clarifications that need to be made. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne, for this very interesting presentation, which I think complements Richard's presentation very nicely. The intention of this session is actually to be quite open and have a bit of a discussion with the floor about this. So I don't know if at this point there are any questions arising from the presentations. So let's just have a quick look around the room to see if there's something emerging. Otherwise, I will probably start from my side. I would like to ask both of you. I was struck by the mention of biodiversity. I mean, biodiversity offsetting. This is something that I don't know all that much about. I do know that from the global loss of biodiversity that we have at the moment, the fastest loss of species is actually in freshwater ecosystems. So when you talk about biodiversity offsetting and the Minamata Convention, I'm very interested to hear what is it that you're talking about. Can I start with you, Richard? Maybe with Anne, you want to talk about biodiversity offsetting?
Yes, thank you so much.
Sure.
When we talk of biodiversity offsetting, first of all, we are looking at the mitigation hierarchy. For instance, if the artisans are formalized and in associations, they can be able to carry out environment and social impact assessment studies or reports. So in these reports, we expect what we call a mitigation hierarchy. And first, which is avoidance. For instance, if we realize that the amount of water that the project is going to use cannot be
sorry, but we can't hear you anymore, Anne. I'm hoping that we'll be able to restore the connection. We'll just wait a little bit. What do you advise? Otherwise,
Yeah.
Richard, you can
So,
continue.
yeah, so while waiting for Anne, I wanted to go back to just to sort of take a step back. So because Anne was, I wanted to go on certain points that Anne raised that I want sort of try and underline. She mentioned about water usage in small scale mining operations. So there's basically two types of operations that you will see. One is dry and one is wet. So each is dependent on the ore and location. So in cases where you have what they call wet processing, there is intensive water use. Now, the key, and this is what Anne also mentioned, is about recycling. So one of the key points that I sort of want to put across is that by eliminating mercury use in the processing and minimizing, and particularly depending on the type of ore, one can achieve a very clean, recyclable water for use in the production process. Because one of the big challenge with current processes that use mercury is that in what they call whole ore amalgamation, this is the type where you do use a lot of water, is that in the slurry where the gold ore is crushed and it's mixed with water, a lot of the miners put mercury into that mix. So by adding mercury into the mixture and it's processed, once that process is done, you can then extract the gold, the concentrate that has gold, and the rest you generally put it out in the river or the stream. And that's what makes it very difficult in terms of recycling water, because you contaminate it in the process. So that's one of the reasons why a strategy towards addressing releases of mercury into water and maintaining water bodies clean is that you eliminate mercury use, you minimize or eliminate the contaminant that goes into the water. The second thing about recycling is that, especially if the process is water intensive, you will need water no matter what. So it makes sense for economically to reuse the water, because as we're all experiencing now, even in areas where there's lots of water before, water is becoming scarce. I've seen that in the project sites that I visited in the Philippines, Indonesia, and most especially in Mongolia. So the idea then of unlimited water, it's not true anymore. And the miners are beginning to recognize that. So one of the things that they are doing now, and we, in terms of trying to promote mercury-free alternatives, is the wise use of water resource as well, and that is water recycling. In some of the projects that I've been involved in, we have a recycling rate, or at least we were trying to achieve a recycling rate of 90%. So anything that's used goes back into the system. But of course, there's also, since the water supply is exposed to sun, there is evaporation. But there, that's the target, high rate of recycling, because if you're not using mercury, there is no reason for you to just release that into the environment, because you'll need that water again to reprocess the ore. So that's what I wanted to sort of emphasize. And I think Anne is back. Thanks, Tobias.
And are you back with us?
Yes, I'm back. Sorry, I lost the connection.
Yes,
I was saying that if we have the miners formalized and regulated, then they can be able to carry out and be able to guide on whether the amount is sustainable for the stream or not. And we achieve this by considering avoiding them and not be compensated, or we minimize through mitigation measures, or we restore such that we can have the water flow again or reach the quantity and quality we would have. If this is not possible, that's when we offset. That's when we offset, and when we are looking at offset, we are looking at where enhance the ecosystem services, and we follow principles of adding to bring it closer to ASG, to enrich the species that are present or compensate for the species that might have been lost in the area where mining is going to take place. So both species and water hydrology should be compensated above what offsetting would look like. And that is the direction we are taking in terms of artisanal mining. We are looking at a time when miners will receive extension services on water use, obtaining permits for abstraction of water, like any other environmental users. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. And can I just ask both of you, actually, from the point of view of like the monitoring of the implementation of the Minamata Convention, as well as the implementation of these national plans, how do you track the way in which that has been put into place? I mean, it's good to have the law, it's good to have the national plans, but how do you monitor the implementation? If you want to start with that, start us off, Richard. Sure.
Tobias, you put us in a spot, but that's a very good question, actually. And that's actually at the center of what's going to be discussed in this coming November. The convention will have its conference of parties here in Geneva. And one of the key agenda items is on effectiveness evaluation. So the answer to your question is still somewhat being discussed. But to give you an idea as well, at least a preview. So we are looking at global monitoring approaches. So there's the approach at the effectiveness evaluation level that looks at the regional global level. And then there's also the more national based approach that looks at, and this is, and Anne knows this really well because she's a national focal point, wherein parties are asked to look at and describe how effective are their measures when they report to the Convention Secretariat. So for example, on Article 7 on small scale gold mining, parties are asked to describe how effective are the measures. And the convention is still relatively young. We came into force in 2017, so we're on our 5th year. And part of the discussions this coming COP as well is on how do you now help parties review how they are implementing their obligations. And one of that is on small scale mining and releases to land and water. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Richard. And do you want to comment on how that has been done in
Yes.
Uganda?
Yes, thank you so much. I'll firstly say that the national action plans for many countries, including Uganda, developed a monitoring framework within the plan itself, and that we use that to find out the progress of implementation of the national action plan. But secondly, unique to us in Uganda and probably other countries in Africa, we have a national coordination mechanism
for the implementation of the Minamata Convention on Mercury. It comprises different sectors of government, NGOs, private sector, and we meet occasionally to find out the progress of implementation of the Minamata Convention on Mercury, including the National Action Plan on ASGM. But also thirdly, the Secretariat of the Minamata Convention requires parties to report, provide biannual and annual reports on the progress made on the different articles of the convention, and the ASGM sector is well covered within this reporting framework. So when the governments are reporting, we get input from the different players within the country, and they report on whatever they have been able to take place. For instance, in Uganda, the CSOs or NGOs have done a very good job in the area of advancing alternatives to mercury use. So every year, every half a year, we hear from them on the progress that has been made, and we transmit this to Secretariat, but also we reflect on what other measures our NAPs are supposed to address. So there's already an existing framework for monitoring, but I should also point out that in as much as we have a framework for reporting, there is a lot of disjointness among the conventions that relate to water conservation, biodiversity conservation. You'd expect that when the CBD is being reported on, or climate change, areas of artisanal and small-scale gold mining should also be reported, because these are contributors. When they harvest the trees, it can also contribute to climate change. So how is the reporting with the other conventions taking place with regard to the Minamata Convention? So that is still a gap, but as we draw closer to working together and harmonizing the reporting indicators for these conventions, we hope to bridge the gap. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. And I think probably these experiences from Uganda will be very useful also in the discussions at the upcoming COP, just to share with other countries and to have some learning experiences on how that's going. I'd like to just pass it back to the floor. I don't know if there are any remaining questions based on the questions and the discussions that we've had. So I see one over here and one over there. Can I start with you, Jean?
Thank you, Tobias. Thank you also for the panelists for their interesting interventions. I'm Jean Willman from the Geneva Water Hub. I had two questions on regarding in the given context at the community level. Since the goal of this convention is to also influence and change behaviors, not to destroy the ecosystems. First, it's how you engage on the topic of the very profits these gold miners are making, and to influence them on proposing something that could help them lessen the damage on the ecosystem, yet still entering their profits, because that's their priority as gold miners. Secondly, as you outlined, Richard, there was the strong impacts on mercury on the fish, and therefore the fishery communities. And I guess there are lots of so tensions or even conflicts at the local level. And so how do you engage with the consultation frameworks around various competing water users? Is it an actor you work with to engage on these trade-offs, or a discussion on how the water should be better collectively managed? Thank you.
Both questions are for Richard.
No, sorry, the both panelists, I think.
Hello.
We're waiting for the next question, Anne.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm not at all a specialist of the environment. I am more into issues of peace and security. I wanted to know, from the point of view of Minamata, you talked about small scales mining. How do you approach the fact that, for instance, in the Saharan space, you have more and more illegal mining, also leading to issues of security, violent extremism, and how how Minamata, or how do you define, in fact, small scale mining, and how do you see what is the proportion of the small scale mining you are covering and the illegal mining?
Start with you, Richard. Okay.
Thank you. So thank you for the questions. So going to the first one. So how do we change the mind of the miners? How do we change behavior? This is very difficult. This is really, really difficult because each, as I would see it, again, it's very contextual. You know, one area would be different from the other, not just in terms of geographic, but culturally. So sometimes at certain points, you do have difficult challenges in terms of utilizing what might work within one area and might not work in another. So a key approach is always, at least as someone who has sort of worked with small scale miners, is really to understand the community that you're working with first and foremost. Never ever, at least from my experience, do not approach a project area knowing what the answers are, because that's where you will definitely fall short. So have an open mind, understand the community, and also understand the context of the community. Because again, you can have the best intentions, but work the wrong way. But one of the things that at least that we've found, that I have found as a practitioner, that's been a common denominator, is that most of these individuals engage because of livelihood and lack of economic opportunities. And unless approaches deal with really substantial, and not just about providing them free charity, because the miners don't like that. I mean, any individual who wants to have a dignified livelihood does not want charity. So that's why a key approach to addressing issue of livelihood is to help them understand proper ways of doing it. And as Anne mentioned, one of the strategies in the National Action Plan is what's your strategies for formalization? So, and I'm also wary of simply saying address livelihood. But fundamentally, a lot of these mining practices happen because of inadequacies that come from the government. When you are in a mountainous area, when you are in a rural area, that there is any economic opportunity for you and your family, you have to do something. And if government is not able to provide the social services into that area, it behooves on individuals to find ways to do so. So it's not just an issue of livelihood, but there has to be a more holistic approach to addressing the deep causes of the lack of economic opportunities in that area. So it's not just a livelihood, but also an economic approach from the central part. So that's why in the National Action Plan, and this is part of the hope of the Minamata Convention, is to bring all these various government agencies together so that it becomes part of a national approach and not just one of these small time approaches. And then in terms of how do you engage on competing water interests, one of the key things is that you have to show the commonality rather than where they conflict. In the early days when we started working with miners, they are very much, they hated, well, rather the fisher folk hated the miners because of the pollution they were causing. But you don't get resolution by having them compete. So one of the things that at least in the Philippines, that we saw working was that giving especially downstream communities an understanding of what's happening, and also a voice in terms of better engagement. Again, the local governments play a key role in this, and in how they characterize solutions rather than problems. So I guess to answer your question as best as I can, there's no one set solution, but one of the things, at least from my experience working in the field, it's the ability to bring and show commonality rather than differences that help bridge dialogue, and through dialogue, some solutions moving forward. The next question on peace and security, how do you approach illegal mining? A key question there, I wouldn't say it's the only solution, but one of the things that we do see, and then the foresight of the convention negotiators was that the ability of miners to formalize, to be supported by government is a key. Because the more, and we've seen it on and off, over and over, the more you criminalize a certain activity, the more it gets pushed and more illegality arises from it. So one of the things that, at least it's been framed, is that in the National Action Plan, it's included as for governments to develop strategies to formalize. And we have to be very careful with that. The convention is not saying make all illegal legal. That's not the approach, but rather, what are your strategies to formalize? Because not all miners are illegal. Not all miners are illicit. There are miners that are informal. So there are gradations of informality, if you may call it. One of the things that we always often say to government that we work with is that we're not telling you to decriminalize. We're telling, what we were hoping is that you can help those who want to be legal become legal, because not all of them. There are certainly sectors who want to continue the illegality, but there's also a big part of that who want to be formalized. So let's help those who want to be formalized and have a separate approach for the illegal or illicit. Those who do child labor, those who use children, that's a different set from those who are trying to earn a living. Those who use small-scale mining as a way to cover money laundering, that's another issue. Deal with that in terms of a criminal approach. But when it's an economic issue, deal with that in a separate way. Thank you.
Thanks. And I'm sure you would like to supplement from your side to those questions. Hello, Anne, are you still with us?
Hello, yes, please. Yes.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, I'm still with you. I'd lost somehow the. You're hearing me very well? The connection seems to be weak. Yes, I'll only emphasize.
Sorry, you're breaking up a little bit. Anne, can you just try again?
Yes, I got the question.
Okay.
Okay. Hello, you can hear me well now?
Yes, we can.
Hello.
Yeah, you're coming through now.
Okay, yes. Yes, I got the question and I'm only going. Okay, I'm only re-echoing what the previous speaker has said by saying behavior change requires evidence-based effects. If we can be able to show the clear use on their lives, on their health, on their environment, you're able to slowly influence behavior change. And of course, also going through their cultural leaders or the structures which they believe in most when they speak, that can also partly influence behavior change. So if we're able to bring the miners on board, formalize them, and show them that if you misuse the water or use chemicals that pollute the environment, these are the effects that have been seen. I mean, the direction we are taking today is because evidence came from the Minamata Bay that mercury is deadly to human health and the environment. We would want them to change in behavior. We need support to carry out research and have evidence that if they change, they will get better profits, they will live a healthy life, and they will live in a safe and secure environment. The other issue I wanted to point out is that when the miners make profits, especially the formal ones, there's what we call royalties. All miners that are in a form in the areas from which they mine. It's just that probably the royalties may be little or not so significant, but this should be able to be used, for instance, to beef up water quality and supply within the areas which the general communities work. We have countries and a legal framework which requires probably miners, especially the former ones, to have bonds put in place or to have money banked, in institutions such that in case they overlook environmental restoration, this money or bonds can be used to restore the environment and ensure that the hydrology or there's hydrological continuity of areas in which they work. And from the environmental point of view, for us, our tool is an environment and social impact assessment, which eventually comes out with conditions that tag the formal or miners or associations or companies that mine to ensure that there's resource use efficiency. And when we talk of resource use efficiency, it covers many things, including water use.
Sorry, you've cut off again, Anne. Yeah.
I've cut off again.
Yeah, you're back again. You're back again. Please continue.
Hello.
Please continue.
I'm back again. Okay, let me just use probably 2 minutes to say what I was pointing out, that for us to influence change, for us to be able to ensure that the water quality and quantity are sustainable in the SGM sector, we need to have evidence-based effects of not having such situations. That secondly, that the miners do contribute royalty or licenses to government. And therefore, these licenses should be able to support the communities that even are not participating in mining, to ensure the security of the water they use in terms of quality and quantity. And quite a number of countries have regulations that require miners to have bonds, environmental bonds, that in case a mining company closes without restoring the environment, then these bonds are supposed to be used to restore the environment. Thank you. I don't know whether I'm still on air.
Yes, you are.
Hello? Okay, yes. Yeah, that's what I briefly wanted to point about. Like the previous speaker said, behavior change cannot be guaranteed, but it can be promoted through having evidence-based issues, evidence-based concerns, and using the different structures, especially at the community level, the cultural leaders, the community leaders, the religious sect, to actually promote change among these communities. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Anne. Do you have any comments on illegality? Because there was a question about illegality as well.
Okay. With regard to illegality, usually it's brought about by the nomadism of the SGM sector. When you visit a site, you'll find quite a number of, different nationals. Today, when you find one, probably a group that is in a certain area will move in 6 months to another area where there is a gold rush. And usually this creates conflicts between the large-scale miners or or similar artisanal small-scale miners, especially where they are conflicting probably licenses or land ownership. But we hope that with the development of the national action plans in the different countries, with the digitizing of the licensing system in many countries now, the issue of conflicts, especially in SGM sites, will be minimized, because someone can now acquire a license and is sure that there will not be any overriding license within such an area. And of course, when they form association, the issue of nomadism, which is one of the concerns that causes conflicts, will also be reduced. But like the previous speaker had said, it is better to sieve out a position that benefits the two conflicting parties and have a common ground. That would be the best way also to resolve such conflicts within the mining sector. For instance, we have seen the large-scale miners cooperating very well with the artisanal miners in terms of capacity building, in terms of employment, and they have managed to coexist in certain areas. So we hope that such areas can be benchmarked and then practices adopted. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. I think we need, in terms of time, we need to leave it here, but I think we've heard a lot of quite exciting innovations and developments underway, including the sort of expansion of national plans under the convention to deal with Minamata, strategies to target people's incomes and support them in their livelihoods without a charitable approach. We've heard stories that improving people's working conditions and their health also encourage them to enter into a scheme which adheres to the terms of the convention. There are royalties which are collected, which can be used for environmental restoration, sometimes environmental bonds even, and the obligation to pay into bonds so that ultimately the area can be restored. Working with local community organizations and federating the miners into organizations together. So a lot of solutions on the table and ways to work forward. So I wish both of you good luck in the preparations for the COP and thank you very much for your inputs. And I hand back to Didier. So thank you very much to everybody. And yeah.
Thank you, Tobias. Thank you, Mr. Richard. Thank you, Anne. And behavior change is required. And I think that's we must understand the context of the community, like Mr. Richard had said, and about this context, maybe supply economic opportunity to the family and institution, the market can participate to this change. Thank you very much.